Absolute at Large by Karel Čapek. Translated by David Wyllie. Performed by Francis Bass. Chapter 4. God in the Basement. The businessman sucked determinedly on his cigar. "And how did you find out about all this yourself?" he asked. "By its effects on me," answered Marek, once more pacing about the room. "By perfectly decomposing matter, my carburator creates a byproduct, the absolute, pure and unbound, God in all his chemical purity. You could say it chucks out mechanical energy at one end and the essence of God at the other, just like separating water into hydrogen and oxygen, only on a much larger scale." Grunted Mr. Bondy. "Carry on." "What I think," Marek went on cautiously, "is that there are some exceptional individuals who are able to separate matter and divine substance themselves. In some way, they can remove the absolute from matter like putting it through a sieve. People like Jesus, miracle workers, fakirs, mediums, and prophets. There's some kind of psychic power that they have. My carburetor does the same thing in a purely mechanical way. It's a kind of factory for the absolute." "Really?" said G.H. Bondy. "But do let's stay with the facts. The fact is that I have made the perfect carburetor. First just in theory, then I made a small non-working model, and then the fourth model started to run properly. It wasn't very big, but it ran like a dream, and it was while I was working with it, however little, that I began to notice a strange spiritual sort of effect, a sort of elation or enchantment. I thought it must be because I was so happy with my invention, or perhaps just overwork, but then I started making prophecies and performing miracles." "What?" Mr. Bondy yelled. "Making prophecies and performing miracles," Marek groaned earnestly. "There was a period that felt like an amazing enlightenment, and it felt wonderful. I simply knew, for instance, completely clearly what was going to happen in the future. I even knew in advance that you were going to come here. And then one day my nail was torn off one finger while I was working at a lathe. I looked at the injured finger, and as I watched, the nail grew back. I was obviously glad to see it happen, but it was a very strange feeling, and there was something horrible about it. Or, can you believe that I could walk in the air? Levitation, they call it. I never used to believe in nonsense like that. Think what a shock that was for me." "I'm sure it was," said Bondy seriously. "That must have been a terrible experience." "It was terrible. I thought I must have some nervous problem, autosuggestion or something. Meanwhile, I'd built that big carburetor in the basement and got it started. As I told you just now, it's been running for 6 weeks now, day and night. And it was only then that I began to realize just how big this might turn out. Within a day, the basement was full to bursting with the absolute, and it was starting to creep its way around the whole house. The pure absolute can pass through any material, of course, but it takes longer going through strong solids. In the open air, it travels as fast as light. When I stepped down into it, it came over me like some kind of fit. It made me shout, and I don't know how I got the strength to run away from it. Back upstairs, I had the chance to start thinking about it. My first thought was it must be some sort of new inebriating gas, like laughing gas, created by the complete burning. That's why I had the ventilator fitted. 2 of the workmen were overcome with enlightenment while they were doing it and had visions. The third one was an alcoholic, though, and that could have made him even immune to it in some way. While I still thought it was some kind of gas, I did a series of experiments, and one interesting finding was that in the absolute, any light shines a lot brighter. If it could be held in glass, I'd put it inside the light bulbs, but it just escapes whatever you try to put it in, however well sealed. Then I thought it must be something like X-rays, but it leaves no electric trace or any trace on photographic paper. On the 3rd day, we had to put the caretaker into the hospital. He lives right over the cellar, and his wife with him." "Why was that?" Bondy asked. "It turned him. He was inspired. He started giving religious speeches and performing miracles. His wife started making prophecies. My caretaker was a thoroughly solid person, an atheist and a freethinker, an extremely sensible man. Imagine all of a sudden he started healing people by a touch of the hand. The police were told straight away, of course, and the local doctor, a friend of mine, was extremely angry about it. I had to have the caretaker put into hospital so that it wouldn't get any worse. They tell me he's doing well in hospital. He's better now, and he's lost his miraculous powers. I'll send him out in the country somewhere where he can convalesce. I started performing miracles myself. I started knowing what was happening at a distance and kept on seeing forests of enormous ferns with bogs and strange animals walking about. This must have been because I was burning coal from Upper Silesia, the oldest sort. The god in that coal was the god of the Carboniferous age." Mr. Bondy shuddered. "Marek, this is awful." "It is," said Marek gloomily. "It slowly dawned on me that it wasn't any kind of gas. It was the absolute. I began to see things, horrible things. I could read people's minds. I shone with light. It was all I could do to stop myself falling into prayer or go out and preach the love of God on the street. I thought of covering up the carburetor with sand, but when I tried it, I started to levitate. There's nothing that can stop it. I can't sleep at home anymore. Even in the factory, among the workers, there have been some serious cases of enlightenment. I don't know what to do, Bondy. I've tried everything you can think of to keep the absolute in the cellar and isolated from the outside world. Ash, sand, metal walls, but there's nothing that can stop it. I tried covering the cellar with the writings of Professor Krejci, Spencer, Haeckel, any sort of positivist, but can you believe it? The absolute can even withstand that. Newspapers, prayer books, St. Adalbert, patriotic songs, university lectures, the works of Q.M. Viscochel, political pamphlets, parliamentary records. The absolute can withstand them all. I just don't know what to do. It can't be enclosed, and it can't be cleared away. It's an evil that's been set loose on the world. Now then, said Mr. Bondy, is it really as bad as all that? Even if all of this were true, would it really be such a great misfortune? Bondy, my carburetor is a terrible thing. It will change everything we know. It will change the whole of society. Everything we buy will be a fraction of the cost. It will mean an end to poverty and hunger. It means there will never be another ice age. But, on the other hand, it will hurl God into the world as its byproduct at the same time. Bondy, I beg of you, don't underestimate its force. God, the real God, is not something we've ever had to get used to. We can't imagine what the presence of God in the world could do to our culture or our ethics or anything else. We're talking here about human civilization itself. Mr. Bondy, the businessman, thought for a short while and said, Wait, maybe it's just some kind of curse. Have you called in a priest to have a look at it? What sort of priest? Any sort. It doesn't matter what denomination they belong to. Maybe a priest could put some kind of ban on it. Superstition! Exclaimed Marek. Don't waste my time with rubbish like that. They'd want to turn my cellar into one of their places of pilgrimage and have miracles happen there. I don't want that. Not with my views. As you like, declared Mr. Bondy. I'll call a priest myself. You never know, and it can't do any harm. At least I've got nothing against God, just as long as he doesn't interfere in business. Have you ever tried speaking to him nicely? No, replied Marek indignantly. That was a mistake, said G.H. Bondy dryly. You might be able to come to some kind of agreement with him. A nice, tight contract. It might read something like, We agree to continue with your discreet manufacture without interruption up to a volume to be negotiated. On your part, you agree to abstain from any manifestations of the divine within so and so many meters of the place of production. How does that sound? Do you think he'd find that acceptable? No idea, answered Marek in disgust. He seems to like existing independently of matter. Maybe in his own interest. He'd be willing to talk to you, but leave me out of it. As you like, the businessman agreed. I'll send my lawyer round first thing. He's a very clever and tactful man. And then, thirdly, it might be worth offering him a church somewhere. The cellar of a factory and all that surrounds it might be a little undignified for him. We ought really to find out what sort of thing he would like. Have you tried that? No, I'd rather flood the cellar with water. Don't get carried away now, Marek. I expect I'll want to buy this invention of yours. You do understand, of course, that I will have my technicians look at it. This is something that needs to be examined. It could just turn out to be poisonous gas after all, but if it really is God himself, if the carburetor really works... Marek stood up. You mean you would dare to set up the carburetor in the MEAS factory? Yes, I would dare, said G.H. Bondy as he stood up. We can put the carburetor into mass production. Carburetors for trains and ships, carburetors for central heating in every home and office, every factory and school. Within 10 years, there'll be nobody left in the world who heats any other way. I can offer you 3% of gross profits. It might be no more than a few million in the first year, but in the meantime, you can move out so that I can send my people in. I'll get a consecrating bishop here first thing in the morning. Try and stay out of his way, Ruta. I don't like to see you like this. You seem so nervous. There's no point in insulting the absolute before we even get started. Marek was aghast. Bondy, he whispered, I warn you now. You'll be bringing God into the world. That's that settled then, said Bondy with dignity. And you have my word on the matter. And I only hope I don't come to regret it. Chapter 5. The Consecrating Bishop. About a fortnight into the new year, Marek was sitting in Mr. Bondy's office. How far have you got? Asked Mr. Bondy, raising his head from some papers. I've finished, answered Marek. I've given your engineers detailed drawings of the carburetor. That bald one, what's his name again? Krolmus. Ah, yes, Krolmus. It was wonderful how he simplified my atomic motor, the part that turns the electron energy into work. He's a very clever engineer, that Krolmus. What else is new? President G. H. Bondy kept on writing and said nothing. "We're building," he told Marek after a while, 7,000 bricklayers. A factory for carburetors. "Where?" "Northeast of Prague. And we've increased our share capital by $1.5 billion. The papers have been saying something about our new invention. Look at that," he added as he laid half a hundredweight of Czech and foreign newspapers on Marek's lap. Then he immersed himself once more in more paperwork. "It's already been 2 weeks now that, began Marek uneasily. "What?" "2 weeks already that I've not been near my factory in Břevnov. I just don't dare go near it. What's been happening there?" And what about my carburetor?" Marek asked, overcoming his anxiety. "Still running." And what about the other one?" President Bondy sighed and put down his pen. "You know we had to have Miksova Street closed off, do you? What was that for? People were going there to pray, crowds of them. When the police tried to disperse them, there were 7 people left dead. They just let them beat them like sheep." "That's exactly what you'd expect, just what you'd expect," muttered Marek in despair. "We closed the street off with barbed wire," Bondy continued, "and we had to make everyone move out of the houses in the area. Just the same religious manifestations, you see. There's a commission from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Information there now." "I think they'll just ban my carburetor," sighed Marek with a sense of relief. "Of course they won't," said G. H. Bondy. "The priests are making an enormous fuss about it, and so the progressive parties are trying to keep it all secret. Nobody really knows what it's all about. I can tell you don't read the papers. The polemic against the church is getting stronger all the time, although there's really no need for it. And, as it happens, the church isn't entirely wrong in this case. That damned consecrating bishop informed the cardinal." "Consecrating bishop? What bishop?" "Bishop Linda, or something. He seems quite reasonable, really. I took him to Břevnov to have a look at this miraculous absolute of yours and give an expert opinion. He spent 3 days there examining it, all the time down in the cellar, and—" "Did it turn him?" exclaimed Marek. "Not at all. Maybe he's had too much training about God, or maybe he's a more hard-bitten atheist than you are. I don't know. But anyway, after these 3 days, he came to me and said that, as far as the Catholic Church was concerned, any talk of God was out of the question, that the Church simply denied any pantheistic theory and banned them as heresy. In a word, that the Church had never given its support to any legal, authorized God. As a priest, he would have to declare the carburetor a fraud, a delusion, and a heresy. He talks a lot of sense, that priest. He didn't feel any kind of supernatural effects, then? He felt everything. Enlightenment, performing miracles, ecstasy, everything. He doesn't deny that those things happen. How does he explain it all, then? He doesn't. The Church doesn't explain, he said. It commands or condemns. In short, he resolutely refused to compromise the Church with any god that was new and untested. And I could see his point. You know I bought a church, do you? What for? It was the nearest one to Břevnov. 300,000 it cost me. I offered it to the Absolute, gave my word in writing that it could move in there. It's a nice little Baroque church, and I even adapted it beforehand so that the Absolute would have everything he might want. And then, the odd thing was that although a few steps from the church, at number 457, there was a plumber who went into a fine case of ecstasy, in the church itself, there's been nothing miraculous there at all. There was one case as far away as Volkovice, and even two in Košírže. On the funicular railway up Petrine Hill, there was a real epidemic of religiosity. All the radio telegraphers working there suddenly started sending out ecstatic telegrams everywhere, some kind of new evangelium. God has come back to earth, they said, come to save us all, and all that sort of thing. Think how embarrassing that is. All the progressive papers have started pestering the Ministry of Posts and really made the feathers fly. The priests are growing horns, they're shouting, and all sorts of daft things like that. No one, so far, has any idea that it's anything to do with the carburetor. Marek, Bondy continued, dropping to a whisper, I'll tell you something, but it's strictly secret. A week ago, the Minister of Defense was affected. What? Marek exclaimed. Quiet. The Minister of Defense. It suddenly came over him while he was at home. The next day he called up Prague barracks and started talking to them about eternal peace, called on the soldiers to become martyrs. He had to resign straight away, of course. In the papers they said he'd suddenly fallen ill. That's how it's going, my friend. Marek was worried. Already in Prague, he muttered. This is terrible, Bondy. It's spreading so fast. It's boundless, President Bondy said. There was someone who moved a piano into Prague from Miksova Street, where all the infection was, and within 24 hours the whole house was going mad. The businessman did not finish his sentence. A servant entered and announced that Bishop Linda was at the door. Marek was going to hurry away, but Bondy sat him back down and told him, just sit down and be quiet. This bishop is a charming man. Then Bishop Linda came in the room. He was a jolly little man with golden spectacle frames and a mouth that liked to laugh, although, as a member of the church, he kept it pursed in a way that befitted a priest. Bondy introduced Marek to him as the owner of that unfortunate basement in Brzevnov. The bishop rubbed his hands in glee, whereas Marek angrily stuttered something, it being a pleasure, although it could be seen on his face that it wasn't. "Just get me away from here, you fool." The bishop rinsed his mouth and turned nimbly to Bondy. Linda was as lively as ever, but hesitated slightly. "Mr. Bondy," he finally began, "I've come to you on a very delicate matter. Very delicate," he repeated, savoring the words as he repeated them. "We have been discussing your case in the consistory. His Eminence, the Archbishop, is inclined to settle this awkward matter as quietly as possible. You see, this undignified matter of working miracles. Please forgive me. I have no wish to hurt the feelings of this gentleman, the owner of—" "Please just get on with it," Marek told him curtly. "Well, in short, all this scandal. His Eminence has given his view that, from the point of view of reason, or of faith, there is nothing more disturbing than these godless violations and downright heretical violations of the laws of nature." "Let me say something," threw in Marek, showing his resentment. "You can kindly leave the laws of nature to us, and in return we won't interfere with your dogmas." "Oh, but I fear you are mistaken," returned the bishop with a big smile. "You are mistaken. Science without dogmas is nothing more than a collection of doubts, and what is worse, this absolute of yours is violating the laws of the Church. It is denying teachings about holiness. It has no respect for Church traditions. It disrupts doctrines of the Trinity, and does so in a rather coarse way. It pays no attention to the apostolic succession. It doesn't even respond to exorcism, and so on. In short, it behaves in a way that leaves us with no choice other than to simply and firmly reject it." Now, interjected Mr. Bondy in an attempt to calm things down, "up until now the Absolute has behaved itself in a way that has been quite dignified." The consecrating bishop raised a finger in admonishment. "Up until now, but we don't know how it will behave in the future. Mr. Bondy, listen," he continued, suddenly becoming more intimate. "It's very important for you that things shouldn't turn out badly. It's very important for us, too. As a practical man, I'm sure you will want to put a quiet end to the matter. That is also what we want, as the representatives and servants of God. We cannot allow some new God to appear, not even a new religion." "Thank God for that," said Bondy in relief. "I knew we could come to some arrangement." "Excellent!" exclaimed the bishop, his eyes sparkling with glee through the lenses of his glasses. "Come to some arrangement. The venerable consistory has already decided that, for the sake of Church interests, it would be willing to take on this absolute of yours as a ward of the Church. It will make every effort to guide it in accordance with the tenets of the Catholic faith. It will acknowledge the miracles at the house in Brzevnov and declare it a place of pilgrimage." "Oh, no!" exploded Marek as he jumped up out of his chair. "Please allow me," said the bishop with quiet authority. "A place of pilgrimage, but, of course, with certain conditions attached. The first condition is that manufacture of the Absolute at the aforementioned address will be kept to a minimum, in order that it manifest itself only in a diluted form which will be weaker, less virulent. In this way, its effects will be easier to keep under control and appear only sporadically, much the same as at Lourdes. I am afraid we cannot take on this responsibility otherwise." "That will be all right," Mr. Bondy agreed. "What next?" "Next," the bishop continued, "the Absolute should be created only using coal from Malé Svatonyovice. I'm sure you are aware that is already a place where Our Lady has performed miracles. So, with the help of coal from that location, we can turn the house in Brzevnov into a place of pilgrimage for the cult of Mary." "By all means," Mr. Bondy acceded. "Is there anything else?" "Thirdly, you must agree never to manufacture the Absolute at any other site, neither now nor in the future." "What?" the businessman exclaimed. "But our carburetors—" "Will never be put into operation, apart from the single one at Brzevnov, which will be the property of the Holy Church and be operated by her." "Nonsense," G.H. Bondy objected. "Carburetors will continue to be made. There are 10 of them due to be installed in the next 3 weeks. Over the next 6 months, 1,200, and 10,000 of them over the next year. We've already committed ourselves to that." "And I have to tell you," said the consecrating bishop quietly and sweetly, "that within a year there will be no carburetor operating anywhere." "Why's that?" "Because nobody, be they believers or non-believers, could have any use for a real, active God. It simply cannot be, gentlemen. It's out of the question." "And I have to tell you," Marek put in with a passion, "that there will be carburetors." Now I'm in favor of them myself, and I'm in favor of them because you are not. Just to spite you, your grace the bishop, just to spite you and all your superstitions, just to spite Rome and all it stands for. And I will be the first to proclaim—" Here the engineer paused to take breath, and then declared with unmelodious enthusiasm, "Long live the perfect carburator!" The bishop sighed. "We shall see," he said. "You will see that the honorable consistory was quite right. Within a year you will stop the manufacture of carburetors yourself. But what harm, so much harm, will have been done in the meantime? Gentlemen, please don't think the Holy Church is opposed to seeing the appearance of God here on earth. The Church merely considers and regulates him. But you, gentlemen, you unbelievers, you would unleash him like a flood. The ship of Peter did warn us about this new deluge. Noah's Ark was able to float above the waters of the Absolute, but this modern society of yours—" The bishop's voice became stern and powerful. "Your modern society will be swept away." This recording is under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike license. Music was performed by the United States Navy Band. The book was written by Karel Čapek, translated by David Wyllie, and performed by Francis Bass.